Yo, what's up, chefs? It's Vinny, and the patch notes for 0.2 or Dawn of the Hunt were just released, and there were a ton of changes. I'm talking like 1,000+ lines of text at least, just an absolutely insane amount. I just got done going through all of the changes. I went ahead and created a TLDR as I was going through it. Tried to highlight the most important and significant changes, as well as like questions that people wanted answers for from the patch notes. I tried to focus on things that were not already discussed in the live stream reveal on the 27th or the following Q&As. With that being said, we do have a lot to go through here, even on the TLDR, so I'm going to try and blast through these. I'll give some extra information here and there where I feel like it's relevant or necessary. Other than that, though, I'm going to try and blast through them and get you guys updated. I do also just want to quickly address that I did make a top 5 league starter builds tier list a few days ago before the patch notes came out. I'll take the L on that one. I probably should not have done that. It's a learning experience for me. I'm a new content creator to the POE 2 scene, although I've played POE before, obviously, but new to the content creation side of things. So I'll just take that as a learning experience. With that being said, Spark Stormweaver, I'll get it out the way, was absolutely gutted, destroyed, and nuked from orbit. Do not play it. If you're thinking about playing it, don't play it. The other 4 builds on the tier list, though, in my personal opinion, although they did receive nerfs of varying degree, honestly are still probably going to be viable, especially considering the fact that we don't have the information for the 100+ new support gems. I think it's going to take time for the meta to shake out regardless, and I just don't think the nerfs hit those builds nearly hard enough to like remove them from the meta. I'm subject, my opinion is subject to change on that. If I see things that change my opinion, whenever we play it here on April 4th, I will, keep that in mind. I'm open-minded, but as it stands, I think they're still going to be pretty viable. Moving on to the topic of this video, though, we're going to start off with the endgame changes. We've got a corruption rework / improvement. So this is a little bit of overlap with some of the live stream reveal, but for those of you that didn't catch it, corruption is getting reworked. It's no longer going to be a +1 level of monsters modifier on map nodes. Instead, it's going to be like a whole new kind of mechanic thing. There's a lot of improvements to the monsters, monster visuals, rebalance of monsters, etc. Essentially, there's going to be sections of your map that are corrupted. They're going to have like a central corruption thing that's, I assume, pumping out the corruption, so to speak. And your goal is to kind of go in there and cleanse that central part. When you do, any remaining corrupted maps in the area will become cleansed. So you have a choice to make between doing the corrupted maps or the cleansed maps, depending on what you prefer. If you do cleansed maps, you're going to get fracturing orbs. It's going to be like a whole different set of monsters and vibe compared to the corruption ones. As it stands, it sounds like the cleansed maps are going to be pretty good for the fracturing orbs, because that allows you to lock a modifier on an item in place. For those of you that aren't familiar with fracturing from POE 1, it's going to be like a new crafting method. So it's definitely going to be pretty good. This is also going to be the way that you get your 30 Atlas skill points, is by cleansing these corruption zones. It's no longer, to my understanding, just going to be like do 10 tier 1 maps. This is going to be how you get your base 30 Atlas skill points from now on. There's a massive tower improvement coming to the game. They've already discussed this in the live stream and stuff, so I'm not going to go into too much detail here. TLDR, if you haven't seen, it's going to be less towers, but each tower is going to be way more effective and have a much larger range, so it should provide a much more quality of life throughout, exploring the Atlas. Now you're also going to get 10 Atlas skill points from completing your first 5 unique maps. You're going to get 2 points per unique map for your first 5. So now you're going to have a total of 40 Atlas skill points instead of the 30 that we had previously. Recombinations getting added to the game. This has already been shown. As Merry Spirits are getting added to the game. Rogue Exiles are also getting added to the game. The TLDR on those is they're kind of like mini league mechanics, so to speak. You'll see them once you play. I'm sure they're going to explain it as in the campaign or at some point throughout the game. There's tablet modifier changes, mainly just like rebalancing here to how some of the tablet modifiers work. Still going to be like an overall buff to towers in general, it seems, like whenever you take into account the whole scope. But some of the modifiers seem to have been nerfed, like the actual ranges that they can roll. But ultimately, it still seems like it's going to be a buff due to the way towers are now going to work. Tier 0 pinnacles are now going to be easier to attempt and easier to complete. So they're going to have half as much HP as they did before. So this is kind of like an undercover buff across the board to all builds as far as T0 Pinnacle completion goes. They're also going to be easier to attempt because now splinters are going to drop on all map difficulties. Previously, I believe you can only get breach and simulacrum splinters from, was it red maps? So I think that was T11 plus maps were what you could get splinters from, but now it's going to be on all maps, and the amount that you get is going to scale up based on the difficulty. There's also going to be guaranteed omens from rituals now. Moving on to the Atlas passive tree changes. So first things first, Breach got giga nerfed. Like every Breach Atlas node basically that was getting played or getting used by the majority of people just got nerfed. Some of them more significant than others, but largely put, Breach got giga nerfed. So just something to keep in mind. As Merry Spirits and Rogue Exiles nodes have been added to the Atlas passive tree, not as their own individual clusters out on the side, but within the main base Atlas tree, they do have their own little sections now. There's also more notable passives, and they reworked existing ones within the base tree as well. So there's going to be more options there. There should be more significant choices you can make and things of that nature. They try to spice things up a little bit. Moving on from that, we have player changes, and I just want to briefly mention that each of the titles for my sections are just mimicking the titles in the patch notes. I'll leave a link to the official patch notes in the description, so if you want to see more about something I'm talking about, you can just come here and then click on that specific section and then just read for yourself. With that being said, for the player changes, we have starting off with Freeze. Freeze is now going to build up roughly 50% slower on enemies. Obviously, quite a significant nerf to any builds that were utilizing Freeze as a defensive layer or like a pseudo-offensive layer against bosses. But, it is what it is. Freeze was obviously quite strong, I think. Player base ailment threshold is now half of your max life, as opposed to previously, this was all of your max life. AKA, we'll be getting frozen a lot more. GG, go next. Curse effect modifiers have been changed to curse magnitude. The way they elaborated on this in the patch notes is that this is now going to be multiplicative with other magnitude modifiers. So the example they used is temp chains can now be improved by curse magnitude and slow magnitude. I'm not sure where else this is going to come into play because most of the nodes on the tree, like the passive tree, are just increased curse effect. So we'll have to see if there's going to be new ways to scale those, such as conductivity and flammability and stuff with new modifiers, perhaps. Auto Bomber seems to be dead based on a number of changes that they made in the patch. I think most people saw this coming, but it seems like most of the currently understood Auto Bomber builds have now been taken out of the game. Player heavy stun. So if you get heavy stunned, it's now going to last 3 seconds instead of 1. This also has an animation to go along with it. It's going to be quite significant. So getting heavy stunned is likely going to lead to your death. I believe you also cannot evade or block while you're heavy stunned. So yeah, heavy stunned is going to be quite rough now. Fully broken armor now causes enemies to take 20% increased physical damage from hits. The way I read this and the way they described it is it very much sounds like a physical damage shock equivalent. So it's going to be a multiplicative modifier, even though it says 20% increased physical damage. So you think, oh, well, increased is in the increased bucket. So why would that be multiplicative? But it's actually the part right before it causes enemies to take 20% increased physical damage. It's the same way that shock reads. To my understanding, that is multiplicative with increases to your damage. So it's like its own separate damage bucket. Sounds like it's going to be quite strong. Seems like a big buff to warriors. I don't know precisely what fully broken armor did before this, but I'm sure this is going to be a welcome change by most warrior players, all things considered. Up next, we have Ascendancy changes, and just to be clear, this is specifically for the Ascendancy passive nodes. This is not for the Ascendancy overall, within the context of skill gems and support gems and stuff like that. This is just specifically, if you look at the changes they made to the Ascendancy passive nodes, were they improved or made worse? So not within the context of any changes to skill or support gems, just the passive nodes. With that being said, Titan nodes were buffed, Warbringer passive nodes were buffed, Gemling Legionnaire was changed. It looks like a nerf to me at first glance, but I'm not necessarily a Gemling Legionnaire expert. I didn't play a Gemling Legionnaire in Season 1. It was not one of my characters that I got to level 90 plus. So do with that what you will. You might want to look into it for yourself, but it definitely looks like a nerf to me. Deadeye received nothing but a slight buff. Pathfinder was changed. Seems like a buff, but it was significantly changed. Somewhat of a rework, you could say, but it was changed. Acolyte of Chayula seemingly buffed, but there is no more Last Flame cheese at this point. It seems like they removed that. Invoker had its Spirit and Protect Me from Harm or the Armor passive node nerfed, and Elemental Expression was buffed with 40% more damage at all gem levels. So a nerf to Invoker overall, but Elemental Expression was buffed. Blood Mage was changed. Sounds like a buff at first glance to me, but also not a Blood Mage expert. I did not play Blood Mage in League 1. Infernalist, Demon Form was changed a lot. You now lose flat life per second instead of percent life, so that seems like a pretty significant change to the way the mechanic worked previously. And then outside of that, it looks like it just got a bunch of buffs in the way it works, but definitely people who are interested in playing Demon Form, recommend you look at those changes. It seems pretty significant. And now also Loyal Hellhound no longer eats 20% of the damage you were going to take. So this is a decently sized nerf to like Infernalist minions or anything that made use of Loyal Hellhound as a defensive layer. Chronomancer was changed. At first glance to me, it kind of looked like a buff, but this is more just like a changed thing. They just did make some significant alterations to the tree or the Ascendancy, so you'll have to look at it for yourself and determine whether or not you think it's a buff or a nerf to your specific build. And then Stormweaver was nerfed pretty much across the board for the nodes that most people were taking, but not including the skill gems and like everything else that happened to Stormweaver, which did result in it being nuked from orbit. The actual nerfs to their Ascendancy nodes were not like super crazy. Most of them did get nerfed, but at first glance, if this was all you saw, you'd be like, oh, Stormweaver is going to be fine. But obviously, this was not all they did. Up next, we have the passive tree changes, starting off with a minor passive tree rework. As they described it, this is going to be focused around the Ranger and Huntress area, so if you're not in that area of the tree, you shouldn't expect to see too many changes. There are going to be a bunch of new clusters added to the tree, primarily to this area, that are going to be in relation to new mechanics that are getting a light shined on them, such as Bleed, Maim, Blind, things of that nature, related to the Huntress primarily. There's going to be a new Bleed notable passive in the Huntress area. The TLDR of this is bleeding you inflict is aggravated. Base bleed duration is 1 second. There's also going to be a new companion notable node in the Huntress area. Now allows 2 companions of different types. Companions get +1 to each defense for every 2 of that defense that you have, and also causes you to have 30% less defense. So this is going to be probably in relation to the Tame Beast thing that Huntress is getting. You'll be able to have 2 of those and be able to up their defense, but it is a pretty significant downside as well with the 30% less overall defenses. There's also going to be 12 jewel sockets removed apparently. They stated this in the patch notes. They didn't really give much specifics as to where or why, and how this is going to actually make its like what this is going to look like in the passive tree, but they did explain that they did remove 12 jewel sockets. Also, 6 notable passives were removed from the tree. I think there was probably 6 new clusters that were added just to replace these, but the ones that were removed were Break Focus, Hold Focus, Lasting Concoctions, No Escape, Pinned Down, and Potent Concoctions. The Acrobatics Keystone did receive a slight nerf. Instead of it being 70% less evasion, it's now going to be 75% less evasion, so it's going to be slightly harder to actually get your evasion rating up to a good percentage if you're going to take Acrobatics. The Eldritch Battery Keystone got absolutely slashed because it is now also going to double your mana cost. So not only is all Energy Shield going to be converted to mana, but it's also going to double your mana cost, which is going to absolutely destroy Stormweaver to an extent. The Unwavering Stance keystone was changed. Now, instead of getting double stun threshold, now you can no longer be light stunned, so slight change here. And outside of everything I already mentioned, there were a plethora of other notable passive skills that received nerfs or changes, primarily to some of the key Ranger and Spark Stormweaver nodes. Overall, Spark Stormweaver got hurt the worst or hit the hardest. There were a lot of their nodes that got nerfed, and Ranger, it was mainly just like Master Fletching got nerfed. I think Falcon Technique got a slight nerf, but not too much. Not nearly as many as Spark Stormweaver had. Moving on to skill changes, starting off with a broad change. Many skills have had their damage or damage growth per level rebalanced. They were quite unspecific as to how exactly, whether or not this is going to feel like a buff, a nerf, whether we'd feel it more in early game or end game. They basically gave no details. They just said that it was changed. In addition to that, all attack skills have had their mana cost reduced much more significantly at higher levels. So this should solve the issue where if you got like a +6 level of projectiles or level of melee skills on your weapon roll, you just like bricked your character. Should solve that. It's hard to say how much of like a buff this is going to feel like to attack skill builds because they were also quite unspecific here, but we'll have to see. Minions were adjusted. It seemed like based on what they described, it's going to be kind of a late game nerf, especially past gem level 20 plus apparently, but they were very unspecific here. They described it as an adjustment, a change more so than a nerf, but it seemed like late game, like deep late game, you should see some fall off. They made changes to arc. It's going to be less damage and more change, or more chains. I put a question mark here because I found this kind of odd. As far as I was aware, I don't remember arc being particularly good. So it, having a damage nerf to me seems odd, but maybe I'm, off the mark there. I'm not sure. Someone can let me know in the comments. Archmage was gutted. It was previously effectively an 8% gain, or 8% of damage gained as lightning damage per 100 mana if you had 20% quality and level 21. Or I take that back, it was 9% gain. If you had a level 21 Archmage and you had 20% quality, you were getting 9% gain per 100 mana, and it is now down to a maximum of 3% gain, which is a crazy nerf. I mean, this is just massive. I'm not sure if we're going to see, like, Archmage even played. I envision it's still going to be possible, but this is just a massive nerf. Blink is also now a travel skill. I don't know if this had to do with the auto bomber builds and somehow this change was going to help them disable them, but regardless, they're now describing it as a travel skill, and this is going to share a cooldown with other travel skills. So I imagine like shield charge. I don't know if leap slam is actually considered a travel skill. I don't think it is, but just let that be known. It is now going to share a cooldown. Bone Storm was changed. Seemed like a pretty significant change to the underlying mechanics of how the debuff worked. I never really played Bone Storm, so if you're a Bone Storm player, you're thinking about league starting Bone Storm, you should probably go check that out. Cast on Minion Death was changed. Cast on Shock had a 50% energy gained nerf. This is another massive nerf to Spark Stormweaver, particularly the Lightning Conduit variant. Most of the nerfs honestly seem to hit the Lightning Conduit variant more, and this is just another example of that. This also does nerf Cast on Shock, Lightning Arrow, Deadeye, but realistically, I don't actually think it nerfs Deadeye nearly as much as it does nerf Spark Stormweaver. Curses were nerfed pretty much across the board. All of the elemental resist curses, flammability, conductivity, all of those were nerfed pretty significantly. Grim Feast was straight up removed from the game until further notice, so it seems like they have some plans in the background for making changes to the gem, and they're planning to reintroduce it at some point, but for the current time being, it is completely removed, so no more double ES as far as we are concerned. Hammer of the Gods received a pretty big rework. No longer is it going to have a cooldown, but instead it's going to build charges based on heavy stunning enemies. So do with this what you will if you're a Hammer of the Gods player. I wasn't. I understand the implications here, but if you played the build, you probably understand how this is going to affect you more than I do. Herald of Ash was buffed, other heralds were nerfed, and of course there's no herald chain going forward, obviously. Hex Blast was slightly reworked and nerfed. Lightning Conduit received its own set of nerfs. Concoctions were buffed overall. Tempest Bell received a significant nerf to its damage, as well as you can no longer have multiple Tempest Bell gems to set down multiple bells. The maximum number of bells is shared across multiple gems, so there's no point in stacking them anymore. And the damage nerf was relatively significant. I think it's still going to be a good gem. I'm sure monks are still going to take it, but it's not going to be completely broken like it was before. And beyond everything else I just discussed, there were a massive amount of other balance changes, mostly nerfs, but there were some buffs here and there though. However, when I read through them, none of the buffs, like maybe not none of, but most of the buffs did not stick out as being super significant to me personally. There was also a section for current support gem changes. There was only about 20 to 30 changes here, and the vast majority of these were changes to the mana cost modifiers, for the most part increasing them, but there were some reductions. And then within that, there were a few just like regular nerfs to some of the supports. I don't recall really seeing any buffs whatsoever, but there might have been like one or two hiding out. Following that, unique item changes. So there were multiple Stormweaver targeted nerfs. I'm just going to put that as like a blanket statement here at the top. I'm not going to go over every single unique item change, but just as a general pattern amongst the unique item nerfs, there were a lot targeted at Stormweaver, but Against the Darkness was nerfed, Astramentus was nerfed, Its Series Disdain was nerfed, Dream Fragments was nerfed, Everlasting Gaze was nerfed, Ghost Wraith was nerfed, Hoa was significantly nerfed, Ingenuity was nerfed, but I'm going to be honest, I thought it would be nerfed more than it actually is. It's now going to be 30 to 50% bonus, but it's going to be 2 rolls, one for your left ring and one for your right ring. So it's probably going to be, it's going to be even more rare to get like 2 50%, obviously. Last Flame was fixed. There should no longer be any cheesing of Last Flame runs, so Temporalis should be much, much, much more rare. The Mahuaxolotl shield was changed. It's now going to have a lower effect of increased soul cores, but it's going to have like some new special effect. Yet to see what that new special effect really does, I believe. Melting Maelstrom was changed. The change basically just read that it's no longer going to recover all of your mana. Precisely what that means is yet to come, but do with that what you will. Moira Invictus was changed / nerfed. It was reworked, basically. It's now going to have 3 random modifiers instead of 2, but a bunch of the best modifiers were removed, and they added a bunch of new ones, but they didn't actually say what all of the new ones were, so it's yet to say, or it's, we're yet to really see the full extent of the changes to this item, but it seems like a nerf at first glance. Pillar of the Caged God was nerfed, Queen of the Forest was nerfed, Temporalis was significantly nerfed, about like 50% for the cooldown part of it. Trench Timber was slightly nerfed, it's 1 less plus level to minions, and there were multiple other random or less significant nerfs given the context of the meta. Up next is regular item changes. So there was a Jeweler's Orb quality of life change. Now, for example, if you have a 3-link gem or a 3-link skill gem, if you use a perfect Jeweler's Orb, it's going to immediately upgrade it to a 6-link. You don't have to do like the individual Jeweler's Orbs in order. So it's a nice quality of life change there. Advanced and expert items have had their name replaced with like their own new name. So they're going to be a completely different named item. No longer is it just going to be like advanced and expert of the original names. Runes are going to have 3 tiers now. I believe it's going to be a lesser, a normal, and a greater. So there's going to be more options there for your runes. Crossbows received a significant buff with a base attack damage buff across the board, as well as there was a bug with one of their modifiers for increase to physical damage. It was rolling as if it was a 1-hand instead of a 2-hand, so they also got that fixed. Rarity of items found was nerfed in a number of ways. Breach rings are significantly more rare. There are new jewel modifiers. Quiver bonus jewels were nerfed. The Azkapa's Soul Core was basically removed from the game. It's no longer going to give increased rarity of items found, and instead it's going to give 5% more quantity of gold dropped by monsters. So this is pretty crazy. It's going to be useless now, basically. Mana modifiers were nerfed across the board on a lot of regular items, so it's going to be a lower range for what you can get mana on your items. And that's going to be for like percent increased maximum mana, even on your amulets, but also like flat mana on your boots, gloves, all that stuff. And then finally, the last thing they mentioned is that the Merchant Choices Relic mod for Trial of Sechamus, the one where you get up to 3 additional merchant choices currently, is now going to be capped at 1 additional merchant choice in the upcoming patch. Following that, we have monster changes. Across the board, monster armor seems to have been reduced by 30%. Pinnacle bosses, half-life at T0, we mentioned that earlier. Trial Master and Zarok are also getting reduced HP. Electrocute and Pin are going to be slower to build up on enemies, right around 50%, similarly to Freeze. And there's a plethora of other buffs and nerfs to certain bosses, but most of them didn't really seem too significant. There's also going to be some minor quest and user interface quality of life changes. A few of these were targeted at like controller support as well. It's worth looking at those if you have any particular issues, but none of them were super significant to me. And they've also enabled a lot of pet microtransactions in POE 2 from POE 1. Also some other microtransactions as well, like a few armors here and there, but not a whole lot, to be perfectly honest. A lot of pets, but not much else. And then there was also 100+ bug fixes. I'm not going to go into all the bug fixes. There were a lot. If you're interested in those, feel free to go check them out. But, it's a lot of reading. So do with that what you will. That is going to conclude the TLDR for the patch notes. I hope you guys enjoyed. I'm super excited for April 4th. I plan to be streaming tomorrow on April 3rd to hopefully do some SSF practice. I've already been doing some SSF practice in the background, leveling up a ranger through, the first couple of acts and then just redoing it. But we should be doing some of that on stream tomorrow in prep for the league launch, and I will see you guys there. Take it easy, chefs. And last but not least, take it easy, chefs. As you fade away, as you fade away.